This program contains language and images that some people find offensive. Viewer discretion is advised.
I'm delighted, truly delighted, to welcome you to the first of a number of lectures we've organized this semester in a series called Museum Voices, Presenting Race, Representing Identities. For nearly half a century, museums have been sites of controversy and critique from communities that have been historically under or misrepresented inside their walls. Resulting debates have pushed many museums to rethink their missions and develop new models for collaboration. These efforts have resulted in expanded perspectives and voices in exhibition design, new approaches to collections care and ownership, and efforts to break down barriers that long made museums unwelcoming places to members of certain communities. At the same time, numerous community and identity-based museums have arisen with a mission to tell the stories and curate the heritage of their source communities and serve as sites for community engagement and social action. This series presents leading scholars and museum professionals who have created new museums, driven innovation in practice, and conducted important research on topics of race and representation. All of our speakers underline the fact that by the 21st century, museums have become important forums for acknowledging multiple identities and multiple voices. Additional support for this series has been donated by the LS&A Winter 2013 Understanding Race theme semester and by the Office of the Vice President for Student Research. Tonight, it's my great pleasure to welcome Dr. David Pilgrim, the founder and curator of the Jim Crow Museum, a 9,000-piece collection of racist artifacts located in a brand new facility at Ferris State University in Big Rapids. The museum began as the personal project of Dr. Pilgrim when he was professor of sociology and grew out of his personal collection of more than 3,000 segregated related artifacts, which he donated to Ferris State to make them publicly accessible. The museum, established in 1996, enables visitors to understand that we learn racism through the common ordinary objects and images that we encounter in everyday life. Dr. Pilgrim is an applied sociologist with a PhD from The Ohio State University. While he is best known as the founder and curator of the Jim Crow Museum, he's also an expert on issues relating to multiculturalism, diversity, and race relations, and has been invited to deliver multiple public lectures at many universities. David's writings, both scholarly and creative, address multiculturalism and race relations and are cited by scholars, students, and civil rights workers who seek to better understand historical and contemporary expressions of racism. In 2012, David received the Robert M. Duncan Alumni Citizenship Award from The Ohio State University, given to an alumnus who has exemplified education for citizenship. Tonight, Dr. Pilgrim will discuss the museum's mission and vision and its strategy of using historical and contemporary race-based artifacts to teach about race relations, and racism. This is actually the second time David Pilgrim has appeared as a guest in the Museum Studies program at the University of Michigan, and it's a special pleasure indeed to welcome him back. The Jim Crow Museum figures prominently as an object of study in both our undergraduate and graduate classes and serves as an exceptional model to museums across our state. David is also one of the most entertaining speakers we've ever had visit us in Ann Arbor. You're in for a special treat tonight. Please join me in welcoming Dr. David Pilgrim back to the University of Michigan.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. And thank you to Brad. I hadn't seen him in, when was I here?
2006.
2006, so I have not seen you in, do the math, 7 years. So how many of you have been to the Jim Crow Museum, the actual facility? Anyone raise your hand? One person. The rest of you should be ashamed. Oh, 2, 3. Oh, no. Since we've reopened. Have you been there since we reopened? Okay, it's a different thing, and I'm going to share that with you. But I want to invite all of you to come. I don't know if you have a life's work, but this museum was my life's work. I collected my first piece when I was 13. I threw it to the ground. I was in Mobile, Alabama. And I don't think it was a philosophical statement I was making. I just thought it was ugly. And people ask me now, well, what was the second piece or the third piece? I don't remember the second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth pieces, but I remember the first one. And I collected, and you know, I wish I had a museum studies professional walking around with me as a 15-year-old, because then they could have said to me, catalog this crap. Write down where you got it. Write down the person's name. Tell the story. Write the story. No one was there. I was just a 15-year-old boy. Of course, I'm going to share something with you later, which I won't be able to use that as an excuse, because I've now just started building a second museum, and I'm making some of the same mistakes that I made the first time. I consider Martin Luther King's letter from Birmingham jail to be one of the great public letters written in this country. And I don't know if you know the story or not, but when he was in jail, he started writing on whatever he could find. And the back of an envelope, the margins in a newspaper. It's an incredible story. He has a metaphor in there that's really ugly. And I tried to find just the part of the letter that deals with that metaphor. And basically it says this, and if you allow me to paraphrase Dr. King, if you really, really, really want to deal with injustice, you got to look at it in a meaningful way. You have to examine it in all of its ugliness, and then you have to lance it like a boil. Let all the ugliness flow out. And I think about that a lot, because at the end of almost every presentation I give, someone raises their hands and says, if you just stopped traveling around the country talking about race, racism would go away. Have you heard that sentiment before? That doesn't even make stupid sense. The reality is we talk about race all the time. We talk about it in hallways, at our living room, at the sofa, at the kitchen table. But we don't often talk about it in places where our ideas are challenged. That's what we do in the museum. I'm going to do what a lot of speakers do, except I'm going to be honest. I'm going to tell a lie. And I'll start with this lie. It's not my lie, by the way. When I was a little boy in Mobile, Alabama, I was born in Harlem. My folks, it was a weird situation. All you need to know is that I ended up growing up in Mobile. And when I was a little boy, it would be so hot in Mobile. And I would sit on the stoop of this one, I guess you'd call it like a market or whatever, but it was just a guy in there, and he had very little for sale, but people would stand out there and for example, buy lemonade. And he'd actually make the lemonade and then sell you cups of the lemonade. And it would be hot. And I was a little boy, and I would listen to these old men lie. They just sit there and tell all kind of lies. And I caught a fish that was so big that I took a picture of it, and the picture weighed 8 pounds. Just silly things. But they'd also discuss sometimes race. And although they didn't use terms like race relations and capitalism and empiricism and deconstruction and all these other words that nobody knows what the hell they mean, but they talked about race in a meaningful way, but they also lied about it. And I remember one lie, because I carried it with me for a long time. They told a lie about a young man who was picking pecans. We have a lot of pecan trees in Mobile. And actually we call them pecans, but pecans either way. And he wasn't making enough money. And so he went to his boss. The young man was black, his boss was white, and he went to his boss and he said he wanted to make more money, and his boss told him he's not going to give him more money. They got into an argument, he quit and left. Shortly thereafter, someone came by his house, knocked on his door, and told him, you better get the hell out of town. It's like, why? I haven't done anything. He said, the story is that you hit Mr. So-and-so. And he was like, I didn't hit him. We just had an argument about how much you need to get the hell out of this town and you need now. So he jumps in his jalopy. And he's going down Telegraph Road. And he hears this caravan of angry voices. And he sees that they're just, I mean, literally, as far as you could see, just cars of angry white Alabamians who are going to hurt him. And his car stops on Telegraph Road. He jumps out of his car. He runs across a dump. Now, this part is true. In Mobile, people used to live on dumps, what's called landfills. He runs across the landfill, the dump, and he escapes. And the mob was so angry that they lynched his car. Now, that's a flat-out lie. And that scared the hell out of me. Can you say hell at the University of Michigan? All right. That scared me. And I was a little boy, and I thought, man, how mean those people must be. I'll tell you why I told that lie. Because if you look up here on the screen, you'll see that recently in this country, people started lynching chairs. And when I saw the first image of a person lynching a chair, my mind went back to that little boy hearing that lie about people lynching an inanimate object, a car. I don't know if you know Luther Vandross. He had a voice on loan from God. Oh my goodness. Has everybody heard of Luther Vandross, the philosopher? And that's a philosophical statement, isn't it? A chair is still a chair even when there's no one sitting there. That sounds like something a philosopher would say, that someone would write a 900-page dissertation about. And those of you that are sociologists or familiar with sociologists, you've probably heard of W.I. Thomas, where he says, if men, and presumably women, define situation as real, they become real in their what? Consequences. And so hanging a chair becomes a real way of expressing certain ideas. That's not a good picture, but that's the new Jim Crow Museum. We used to be in a 500-foot square room, 500 square foot room. And the advantage of being in such a small room was you got overwhelmed. And one of the messages that we were afraid that we would lose by moving into a much bigger space is the idea that these objects permeated the entire culture. They not only permeated the entire culture, Brad, they were almost omnipresent. We were afraid we would lose that by moving into a bigger space. So when you come in, and this is being taped, so I have to watch what I say. I had so many creative, how do you say, struggles with the design team. I'll give you one, and I won't give you their name, although they did great work, by the way. They would say to me, you only want to show one object. Emphasize the object. Have lots of didactic panels that explain the object, but show the object. And my theory was, you're working for me. And as long as you're working for me, I want to hear your ideas, but I want you to know the tie goes to me. And the point we want to make is that everyday objects permeated this culture, so we will make a concession, and that is this. We will have spaces where 100 objects are, and we will pull one object out in front. I go to some space, and by the way, when you've been trying to build a museum for 15 years, which is what it took me, when you go to places that have lots of space, you lust after their space. Does that make sense? I would go to anybody went to the Charles Wright Museum? That thing is huge. It's so huge, it's got an echo. I mean, right when you know what I'm talking about? It's got this huge echo. It's huge. And I would sit there and I think, man, I could put 500,000 objects in here. I could really make the point I'm trying to make. And so what we did, if you look down this row right here, you can see And we have a long row that probably has 2,000 objects in it. And it's divided by caricatures. Every group in this culture has been caricatured, but none as often are in as many ways as Africans and their American descendants. And so we have the Tom, the Sambo, the Mammy, the Coon, the Pickaninny, the Tragic Mulatto, the Sapphire. I counted like 27 one time. We have a long row of them with descriptions and examples. On this wall over here, and that wall is about the size of, say, 3 times the size of this screen, that wall has laws. Blacks and whites can't play checkers together in Birmingham. Can't use the same telephone. Can't ride together in the same part of a car. In other words, you can't be in the same next to each other in a car. At least one seat has to be one seat difference in riding on the bus. Just laws after law. And we have voices. When you walk by there, it triggers voices. And we have 4 people reading the voices, and they read 4 voices from 4 different people, 1 voice from each. You know what the hell I'm trying to say. For 4 people reading. And it's just reading all the laws, all the laws. Again, to give you the idea of how much it permeated the culture. If I had my druthers, I would have no material in there about the Klan, because the Jim Crow Museum is founded on the idea that everyday objects both shaped and reflected attitudes toward African Americans, both shaped and reflected attitudes toward African Americans. And when you put a group in there like the Klan, it does a couple things. And one of those things that it does is this: it allows people too much psychological distance, because someone could say, after all, I'm not a member of some right-wing fascist group. That's not who I am. Oh, I read Little Black Sambo. And I sit at home on my piano, and my family, and we play and sing Coon, Coon, Coon. And I have parlor games that ask me to act like a little boy eating fried chicken. And I got Aunt Jemima and all this other stuff. But I'm not a member of the Klan. And yet, you and I both know that you cannot tell the story of race in the U.S. without telling some of the involvement of the Klan. If we had enough time, Brad told me I only have 4 hours, but if I had a lot of time, I'd tell you the story of me buying a Klan robe in Howell 10 years ago. I don't know if any of you remember that story. I'd give you my side of what happened. And that's what one of the sections looks like. And the exhibitor, some of you will build museums. And you will have creative arguments, and that's good. That's what higher ed is, isn't it? I kept trying to explain, and another difference, Brad, is I kept trying to explain to the design team that we're higher ed. We actually read. And they were like, well, yeah, but you don't want to put books on the wall. I was like, yeah, there are cases where I'm going to put a big panel, and it's going to have a lot of words on it. Because right next to it, I'm going to show a lot of objects. Lawn jockeys, we have a section on lawn jockeys. By the way, what we do inside the museum, we originally started with a home theme. So we have a kitchen, and we have a living room, and we have, different rooms in a home. And this right here is like the outside of a home. I don't know, can you tell? And I brought a picture that showed this. I didn't have one with, I'm not going to start. And that Ohio State stuff getting ready to kick in. I'm sorry, I got to remember where I am. But anyway, that one says Michigan State. But we have them from a lot of different groups because people painted them all kind of ways. When we were in the little room, we did not have the space to tell other stories. We could only tell the story of who was Jim Crow, what was Jim Crow, the role that violence played undergirding Jim Crow, and the role that everyday caricatured objects played undergirding Jim Crow. But we couldn't tell some other stories. For example, what was the African American response to Jim Crow? And I tell you what, this is off the record here, it was a whole lot easier to reach into my back pocket and pull out money to buy objects that were affirming than to have bought all the racist stuff over the years. And I also had a chance to learn. I'll give you one quick lesson. Jack Johnson, was he like 6 feet tall, 200 pounds, knockout power in both hands, much like myself? And you know Jack Johnson. Actually, what's Burns? I forget, Ken Burns. He did a documentary with the great title about Jack Johnson. He had the great title, Unforgivable Blackness. What a great title, right? Straight and to the point. And you know the story of Jack Johnson. He became the first black heavyweight champion of the world, and that was an affront to white supremacy in his culture, and so a pursuit for what ensued? For the great what? The great white hope. And we start looking all over America for some white guy who could defeat Jack Johnson. And Jack Johnson had lost his mind. He would be in a ring, if not the only, one of only a handful of black people in a crowd of 50,000, and would be beating a white champion, would let the champion catch his breath and then beat him some more, would taunt him, would then eventually defeat him and leave the ring with his white wife in a state where that was illegal. He eventually went to prison on trumped up charges. And our government has come close to apologizing. You know what I'm saying? You're playing with the idea of apologizing to him. But while he was in prison on these trumped up charges, and really the charges were that he went across a state line with a white woman who was his wife. What was that, the Mann Act? Violate the Mann Act? But while he was in prison, do you know, and why am I telling you this story about Jack Johnson? Because he had one of the early patents for the wrench. We think of him as a black brute. That's one of the caricatures of African Americans, which emerged during Reconstruction, and is actually one of the dominant ways of portraying young black men in this culture today. We think of Jack Johnson as the prototypical brute. But we don't think of him, a thinking man who designed, I don't mean built it with his hand, I mean sketched out and designed a wrench. So I get a chance to tell those stories. One of my prized collections, I was telling Brad this, is that we have one of the ink pens that President Johnson used to sign the 1964 Civil Rights Act. The most comprehensive act, Civil Rights Act in America's history. And you know, presidents sign with like 10 pens, right? They write 2 letters, put it down, whatever. Well, we have one of them. And we get a chance to, I mean, that's history. And at least officially, that represented the end of Jim Crow. Well, we get a chance to tell the story of this civil rights story in this new space because we have more room. And we also tell the story, by the way, of the way African American artists use their art to fight racism. What's the African American professor here? John Lockhart. We have his painting, the one with called No More, with the angry, in other words, Mammy, who's often portrayed as this contented, docile when it comes to her white superiors, woman, loyal to a fault, and she's got her fist raising up, in effect is saying, I ain't your mama. Well, we have that piece in there. If I got a chance to meet him while I was here, or if someone tells him about tonight, if you know him, tell him that one of his students, John McDonald, who is a professor at Kendall, which is also part of Ferris now, painted the mural in our museum, and that he was his inspiration, because that's a nice little connection, you know? Well, anyway, after you go through those 3 sections, you feel good, because at first you felt bad. You walk down this timeline. We got this African-American timeline outside, American timeline about African Americans outside. You get inside, you see the stuff about Jim Crow and people painting their face and minstrel shows. Then we walk in the middle and there's a lynching tree. And I've actually had people think it's an actual tree. That's how real it looks. It cost me $17,000, by the way. It's a tree. And I've had 10 people pull the rope down. I don't, you know, that's a lot of stuff going on there. But, and then that whole section on violence is in there. And then when you step through the mouth of the coon chicken importer, which we recreated, and there's just this long, big room of caricature pieces, and you're feeling like, oh my goodness, this was horrible. And then you see a part about African-American artists attacking racism, and then you see a part about African-American achievement, blacks in politics, blacks in sciences, blacks in the military, that whole section, and then right after that you see the little civil rights part, and you're feeling good. And then right then we show you this. And it's a display that's about double the size of this right here. So if you can, well, it's actually bigger than that, but like from here over there somewhere. And what's in there are pieces all made in the last 10 years. All made in the last 10 years. America is right now more democratic and more egalitarian than it has ever been. But we are not yet, as President Reagan used to talk about, the shining city on the hill. We still struggle. And if you show me a race-based dialogue occurring at the national level within 1 week, there will be 2- and 3-dimensional pieces created in this country, and not that long after that, in our museum. One of the proud moments, this is the mural, but now you're looking at 1/10 of the mural. There are a lot of people up there, including Viola Liuzzo is up there. Well, there are lots of people up there, but one of the proud moments in my life, if you think about when Malcolm X was killed, Betty Shabazz, his wife, was pregnant. And she was pregnant with twins. Remember the story? Well, one of those twins came to the museum last year, actually within the last 6 months, and her, Malak Shabazz. And man, that was one of the great moments for me. And she said, I don't know if you can tell, but she's doing what, she's almost posing the way her father posed. Can you see that? That's her father. She's got her hand up. That's the Malcolm thing. And I said to her, John McDonald's not here, the guy that did the mural. But if he were here, he would be too modest to ask you what I'm going to ask you, which is this. What do you think your mother would have thought of the mural? The depiction of your father on the mural? And she said to me, I think my mother would have loved it. And I cry easily. I cry watching Honey Boo Boo. So you know I just fell out crying. We have 2 traveling exhibits. I created the first traveling exhibit along with our art director, Carrie Weiss, because I recognized that a lot of people, as demonstrated by the show of hands with the poll we did earlier, are not going to come to Big Rapids. And I wanted to take the messages of the museum outside. So we created a traveling exhibit called Hateful Things. And it's been a lot of places. It's been Penn State, it's been University of Florida. It was just at the Mark Twain House in Hartford, Connecticut. Actually, we created 2. Because right after I created this, I started getting people complaining to me, and they'd say, listen, you travel around this country saying that subjugation is wrong, that prejudice is wrong, stereotyping is wrong, discrimination is wrong, and yet you only talk about anti-black subjugation. And I was like, because it's the Jim Crow Museum. Now, that answer, though flippant, was true, but then I started thinking about it. I've seen other stuff. I skipped it. So I could collect, so I began collecting, I don't know, probably about 7 years ago, not in earnest, but some pieces. And we created a second traveling exhibit called Them, Images of Separation, which has not just African Americans, but many groups, poor whites, Asians, gays, just any number of groups that are in there. One real cool thing that recently happened, I don't know if you know this, Mark Twain and Harriet Beecher Stowe lived really close to each other in Hartford. I did not know that. I mean, they lived from probably 200 feet apart. I mean, very close. And so Mark Twain's house is now connected to a center / museum, whatever. And the Harriet Beecher Stowe's home now has a center, house, whatever. The Them exhibit of ours was at the Harriet Beecher Stowe house, and the Hateful Things exhibit was at the Mark Twain house. And I thought, wow, I've made it, Brad. You know what I'm saying? This is so cool. And you know what was really cool was standing in Mark Twain's home, which they don't let people go in his bedroom and stuff. And I don't know why I needed to be in his bedroom. I'm not that interested. But 2 things. One, he slept upside down, which is kind of interesting. I don't know why that's interesting. But I was in the room where he wrote, I think he wrote the Connecticut Yankee up there, and there was some other things. And, I always had the understanding of Mark Twain that you have from having gone to public schools and not paid a lot of attention, that kind of thing. But while I was there, I realized that he, like Paul Bear Bryant, the coach of Alabama, like any number of other people, started at a certain point on race. And by the time he finished, he had evolved to a much better place, in my opinion. I was joking with Craig Hotchkiss, the educational director at the Mark Twain House, and I said, if Mark Twain had lived any longer, he'd have been a Black Panther. I mean, but he came a long way. I think does everybody know what Jim Crow is, so we don't have to go over that? But we do have to go over that? Okay. Well, let me have someone tell me what it is, then we don't have to go. Stop reading. Just, it's like Alice Trebek, he's got the answer, so he knows everything, Somebody tell me, hello, what was Jim Crow? I'm gonna take this off so look. What was Jim Crow, anybody? Yes, ma'am.
It was pretty much an era that started not too long after
Mm-hmm.
to kind of create barriers and to hold African Americans back
Mm-hmm.
Outside of slavery. So,
Mm-hmm.
slavery wasn't legalized at that time. It was basically new things that were introduced to keep African Americans from prospering.
Well, and I'm glad you said slavery too, because it actually mirrored it in a lot of ways, right? Some of the same, denial of rights and the like. One of the things I do notice is when I ask people what was Jim Crow, they always mention to me those segregation signs. And obviously, it was more than that. I mean, it wasn't just the legal part. Economics, it was every aspect of life. It was a racial caste system. That's the easiest way to say it. This is also the name of a play. I have not seen it. I came very close, but it was in North Carolina. I missed I wasn't there exactly with that, but there's a play with this name. But this is what people think about when they think of Jim Crow. But when I think of Jim Crow, I'm more likely to think about this, economic deprivation in an absolute sense. See, that's the other Jim Crow. If you have a long time, and I'm sure there's people here that have already done it, have you read The Warmth of Other Suns? Raise your hands if you've read that. Okay, 2, 3 people. That book is so thick you could fight somebody with it. I mean, it is, what is it, 800 pages? It's literally, how many, isn't it like 700, 800 pages? Is it Isabel Wilkinson, is that her name? That was the book, that was our book at Ferris that, we adopted and embraced and all. The reason I mention that book is if you really want to understand what it was like to live under Jim Crow, I recommend a couple things. And one of them would be to read that book, because those were people who couldn't live under Jim Crow any longer. And that's why they migrated for decades to the west and to the north. That's why when I go to Buffalo, New York, and I can go to a section of Buffalo where the people are from my neighborhood in Mobile, Alabama. Or I could go to Jackson, Mississippi, and I could go to Chicago, and there's a section of Chicago of black people who came from Jackson, Mississippi, or from Greenville, Mississippi, that went to Milwaukee or whatever. This great, great, great migration. And they left for a reason. It wasn't just the boll weevil. It was they could not stand to live with the oppressiveness of Jim Crow, where if you were working with someone, they could just beat you. And I won't leave that image up here long. I'll actually take it off. I won't go there. I'll just go back to that. We don't talk about lynchings in this culture. And one of the controversial things about our museum was putting up that lynching tree. The reality is that at the low end estimate, at least 4,000 African Americans were lynched in this culture. And by lynching, I don't mean hanging. I mean publicly killed. They could have been riddled with bullets or burned. Like I had a debate with someone at my institution. They wanted to change the name of the annual African American sponsored picnic to Pignic, which they did, because they said that the word picnic originated from pick a nigger and lynch him. And I tried to show them the French derivation of the words that just wasn't what happened. And that if they wanted to ban a word, Don't choose that word, choose barbecue, because in many of the newspapers that advertise the Atlanta Bee, oh, what's that? No, the Atlanta, what's the Atlanta newspaper? That's the Sacramento Bee. What's the Atlanta newspaper? The Constitution, very good. That when they advertised a lynching that hadn't even happened yet, they described it as a Negro barbecue. So if you just want to start banning words, pick the right one. Oh, and I got to say this. Has anyone seen Eyes on the Prize? The series? It's like, what is it, 8 parts or something? Wonderful, wonderful, wonderful series with some very nuanced understanding of what happened. And I'll give you an example. When Goodman, Cheney, and Swerner, remember the 3 civil rights, when they were killed, they had one of the episodes of Eyes on the Prize was about those 3 civil rights boys being killed. And they were talking about looking for their bodies. And one person just said something when they were being interviewed. They said that while they drugged the rivers, they found many unnamed bodies. And it enlightened me and offended me. By enlightened, I meant I hadn't thought about all the bodies that you would just find that don't show up in those statistics that the NAACP or the Tuskegee Institute or some of these people that were trying to count came up with. But the part that offended me was this, to refer to them as unnamed. Now I leave the sociologist me and become the preacher, advocate me, and tell you that we all got names. You just don't know their name. When I was at Stanford giving a talk, who did I meet that was at over here? I forgot your name already. What is it? Emma. Emma. And she went to Stanford as undergrad, is that right? Yeah. When I was out there, I was giving a presentation years ago at Stanford, and a student raised his hand. He says, Dr. Pilgrim, I think I had like 5,000 pieces at the time. He raised his hand and said, Dr. Pilgrim, I can give you one word that will be an umbrella term for everything that's in your collection. I'm like, okay, smart Stanford student, right? And I said, okay, what's the word? He said, propaganda. And you know, it's like an epiphany. All my life, I thought of propaganda as grainy old film, leaflets and brochures. You know what I'm talking about? But that's what this is, propaganda. Objects created and disseminated with the express purpose of shaping ideas, beliefs about a group of people. Isn't that propaganda? That's what, so a bank can be propaganda. Ashtrays, propaganda. Dominoes. Okay. License plates. I have a colleague, works for me. If you go to our website, anybody been on our website lately? Please go today. Go, just get up now and go get on a computer. Franklin, he's a young man, he's a videographer in my office. And he just created today, he just put it on the web, a like 3-minute or something montage of sheet music played to this song. And I want you to think about that as you listen to it, because this is my example of how pernicious these ideas are spread, the pernicious way they're spread. Imagine, long before computers, long before all this other stuff, a family is sitting around a piano, and they're singing, and they're enjoying the fact that they're in a family. They're having a good time with each other, and they're singing and laughing, and this is the song. This is an 1896 print. A student gave me this print. And it's been reproduced as postcards, reproduced as posters, reproduced any number of ways. And if you come to the museum, what I ask you is, what is it you see when you see this? What is it you see? This right here is a postcard. Now, how many of you know in the U.S. we used to have corporal punishment? I don't mean in your homes. I mean in public squares, okay? We have like 2 people that know everything. And it's like, we used to, yeah. And you remember Michael Fay, the young man in Singapore? He did some vandalism, and he was going to get 6 canes. And everybody was like, yeah, cane him, cane him. They didn't even realize that caning is not spanking. It tears the flesh when the cane hits the naked part of the body it hits. And they were like, yeah, that's what's wrong with the U.S. We don't have that kind of. It's like, what are you talking about? We used to have that. As a matter of fact, Delaware had a famous or infamous pole that people were tied to and beaten, and it was called what? $100. Anybody who knows? 20. 5. No money at all. You waited too late. It was called Red Hannah. Holding a woman. Why do you think it was called red? The blood. Now, you don't have to be a criminologist to realize that poor whites and minorities were disproportionately ones holding on to that pole. This is a picture of that. Of one, that's not the Red Hannah pole, it's a different pole. It's also Delaware. And this was from the, I think this was from the 20s, but those poles were used until at least 1950. We blew this up in the museum. And what you can't see over here at the end, see right, this boy? That's a little black boy watching this. Now, here's the other point. Yes, it was a whipping post. Yes, people were being beaten with it, but it's also a postcard. It has a functionality, the function of a postcard. So someone sent it in the mail. We have hundreds of postcards in there. And you remember 10 Little Niggas, the poem, which became 10 Little Indians, which became And Then There Were None. We don't really have a lot of gollywogs in the U.S. Basically, if you want to look at the history of gollywogs, I wrote an article about the gollywog. You can look at it. It's funny because now I'm involved in controversies in Ireland, in England, in quite a few European countries, because the gollywog for them is in some ways like the teddy bear was for American children. And so people are looking at the gollywog and thinking, not in their mind, in a conscious way, any racist thing. They're just thinking about what you would think about this object of comfort. So we have a whole section of gollywogs. And I was just in Grand Rapids, well, I live in Rockford, but we just had a big antique show at it wasn't the DeVos Center, but it was the place, well, maybe in the DeVos. Anyway, some huge one. And a person had a gollywog in there, and it's rare to find a girl gollywog. And the person had one, and they wanted like $150, and I didn't want to pay that much money for it, because I'm hardly buying any pieces these days. And the person said, oh, but she's so cute. And I said to her, cute is subjective, isn't it? It's like, what the hell is this guy talking about? How many people remember Little Black Sambo? Anybody? Yeah. And Little Brown Coco? Again, films and toys. So in the museum, we have cartoons from the 20s, from the 30s, from the 40s, from the 50s. And we don't say to people, this is racist. What we ask is, when you see that cartoon, what is it you think? What is it you see when you see that? And why is it you see what you see? And we also have cartoons from the 2000s. And, you know, if you really want to start some arguments in there, we have a whole section of cartoons on, what's the Cleveland Show and Boondocks. And there's another new one that we have, some of the modern cartoons. This is the Coon Chicken Inn Porter. The Coon Chicken Inn was a restaurant chain in Seattle, Spokane, and Salt Lake City. Notice I did not say Mobile, Alabama, New Orleans. You get where I'm going with this? These are West places. Look how big the head is. The head is so big you walk through the mouth. That's what we recreated in the museum. As you enter the caricature part of the museum, we recreated the porter's head. I couldn't have worked in there. I wasn't dark-skinned enough. I got too much Native American in me. You had to be dark-skinned. They had blackface vaudeville shows in there. I mean, it was a collection of racism like you would not believe in every Coon Chicken Inn. So what is it we're doing? Someone said to me one time, you're building a shrine to racism. And I said, yeah, in the same way a hospital is a shrine to disease. What we're building is not a shrine to racism, it's a shrine to dialogue. If I didn't believe in the triumph of dialogue, I couldn't be an educator. Any educator who does not believe in the triumph of dialogue is not an educator. Hello, does that make sense? So we want to create a place where people are talking openly and honestly, not proselytizing. No one has to leave there thinking, matter of fact, most people that leave there don't know what I think about something. But I need the person who believes that Aunt Your Mama is just a wholesome, nostalgic reminder, and the person who believes that it's a vestige of slavery and segregation to be a part of a conversation. And that's the purpose of the museum. So what is that? Everybody, can you see what that is? What is it? A porter's hat. Well, give me another name. Not a porter's cap, but what? Well, that's close. And you know what? That's actually really close. It's a chauffeur's cap. Dr. O.C. Nix, historian, walked in class one day when I was anyone here undergraduate? Is it? Oh, wow. All the ones that are answering questions are undergraduate. What do you do to the graduate students? You beat it out of them that they don't understand stuff? So it was like junior year history. He walks in class. This guy's African American who went to school in like the 30s and 40s, right? So it was nothing we could do right. I'm just telling you. And it was a historically black college, Jarvis Christian College. We had to go to church every day. Do they still have that rule here at University of Michigan where you go to church every day? Not the kind of church I was going to. What did you say, Brad? So 7:15 in the morning, we praising God. I'm talking about with passion, not just this kind of anthems thing. I mean, sweating praising, right? Like Jesse Jackson, but sincere. I'm sorry. So anyway, I'll get to all the people I criticize in a minute. So anyway, he walks in class and he puts the cap down and he says, what is this and what did it have to do with Jim Crow? So we're smart, right? We're the generation that's going to bust America open, right? And we're like, well, during the period of Jim Crow, African Americans were denied the opportunity to participate in many of the job segments. You know, we go, couldn't be this, couldn't be this, couldn't be this. And they were limited to certain jobs. For example, the chauffeur's cap. Next question. And he's like, nope, that's not what I want. And we kept going. So then people just repeated the same thing in a different way, right? Because, nope, not what I want. And after a while, okay, sir, please tell us. And this is what he said. If you were an African-American professor, you were middle class. Even though you didn't make what they made at Jarvis, you didn't make what they made at Texas Christian University or Texas Tech, but you were still middle class. And you could, if you wanted to, find your way, maybe, into a new car. And many historically black colleges were located in small rural towns. Or you had to go through a small rural town to get to your college. And if you were in a new car, you better have a chauffeur's cap in your car. Does that make sense now? So that if you were stopped, not just by a police officer, but by any white person who thought you were trying to be white by driving a new car, you simply put the chauffeur's cap on. And I remember thinking when he said that, Brad, and I'm not lying, if you can teach about race with an object that has none of these objects have any inherent meaning, but doesn't even apparently have a direct meaning to race, then how much more can I teach with an object that is more directly related to race? When I bought the Klan thing, the newspaper articles there, and a woman from Brighton called up to Ferris and said, if David Pilgrim will come down, I will give him 2 signs that I stole from public transportation in Louisiana in the 1930s. And I was like, wait a minute, I just left Howell in one of the most interesting nights of my life. Aren't you just north of Howell? So like, yeah, I was like, that's right, I don't want it. And she said, no, you come down here and get this. Why don't you quit being a coward and get, I was like, whoa, whoa. And she was like 90-something years old and was making her peace with the world, and she had these pieces. And museums had tried to get these pieces from her. I said, okay, fine, but pick a restaurant, because she wanted me to pay for her dinner, much like I did today. She wanted me to pay for dinner. I said, pick a restaurant that I can see from US 131. No, I'm not lying. That's what I said. She picked a restaurant. I went down. She had these 2 signs. Now, I'll show you something. You've all heard about Rosa Parks. And you know some of those stories. And some of you even know the story about how there had been other black women who had had a similar situation, but they weren't considered holy enough or proper enough to be used as a test case. You know that stuff now, right? We're big people. That's not cynical. That's just the reality. But we don't know the whole story, and an object can teach you the whole story. Look at these metal parts right here. There's a metal part there. I wish I had the little pointer thing. It probably is on here. The little metal part. It allows for it to be moved. You following me? This is the value of an object for history. Black Americans sat in the front of buses in all the buses they were in, at least that I know of. Certainly the ones in Alabama. And they sat in the front of the bus until what? Until a white person got on. As long as you had one empty seat between you and the white bus driver, you could be sitting at what is in effect row 2. White person get on, you go to row 3. Then you go to row 4. And by the time you get to an all-black neighborhood, it's only black people on the bus. When you get to the white neighborhood, the blacks are off because they don't live in the same neighborhoods in most cases. You get where I'm going with this? But what's the value of this? When Rosa Parks said she was tired, she wasn't just tired of moving. What the black person had to do, they had to pick it up off it and put it down. And not just one time. Get up, put it down. Another place, get up, move the sign back. Don't make me ask you to move that sign back again. So isn't that a different layer? That's like someone sending me out to get a whipping, to get the switch to whip my own ass with. The indignity, that's insult to injury. I got to constantly get up, and I have to move it back. So in the museum, we do exercises. And I made up a bunch of exercises. And one thing about our facility is this. Anything you find on the website, use it. Quote me if you don't mind. But anything you find on there is free and open to the public. We're a free resource. I don't charge people a dime to come in. Guided tours or unguided tours. The articles are free to the world. The exercises are free to the world. I love this exercise over here because what we do is we put people in a small group and we ask them to come up with 25 words to go on a placard. And it's funny because when I was up in Canada, some of his old students that were here the first time I came here, they were in the group and they were actually wanting me to use the sign, and they got so competitive about their 25 words. And I was like, you're missing the point. The point of it is just arguing about what is important that we say on the placard. Those people, by the way, are from Australia. And they came there because Queensland University is sponsoring, well, actually the Australian government, through Queensland University, is building a museum about Aboriginalia, using the Jim Crow Museum as their example. Isn't that pretty cool? So this is one thing. First lesson I've learned is people come in there and they're stunned. I need to respect that. I need to always be mindful of that. That I'm looking at something for the 100th time, they're looking at it for the first time maybe. I've also learned, and I hope to teach you, that there's not a single object in our museum, not a single image in our museum that is not currently being made. Not one. Not a single image. Okay? And the only way I can prove that to you is if you come to the museum. Not a single image. Again, that is not to say we have not made tremendous progress as a nation. The fact of the matter is that with Cafe Press, Yahoo, eBay, and other internet auction houses, one person can create hundreds of different images. I got a phone call recently about the whole Adidas thing, got into an argument with some of the civil rights leaders around the country, because for me, when I looked at what Adidas was doing, I did not see slavery. What I saw was a glamorization of prison culture. And my Ohio State colleague, Michelle Alexander, in her book, The New What? Jim Crow, makes a strong argument that African American incarceration is at such a high level, and the supervision of African Americans, especially men, is at such a high level that it approximates a Jim Crow system. So I'm thinking that has to do with the glorification of the prison culture. Either way, it's not great. In that section that I talked to you about, I told you that there's a section on new objects. And to be quite frank with you, I could create an entire display on just race-based objects that defame President Obama. How do I know that? Because I already have the objects. MSNBC is coming to our museum on the 2nd to shoot an episode about what I just said. And I'm talking about objects that portray the president as a monkey, objects that portray him as a cream of wheat, Sambo, just any old-fashioned racist idea that you can think of. The fact of the matter is, I think a person can make strong arguments about the policies of the president, but you don't have to draw him as a monkey. Shouldn't it be enough to just disagree with the ideas? Hello? This right here's a t-shirt. And I'll tell you one mistake I made, Brad. I don't know if I told you this the first time I came here. Never should have called it the Jim Crow Museum. Made a mistake doing that. Because, and I'll tell you why I did it. I did it because my collection was basically from the 1870s to the 1960s. So it seemed like, and I could organize it around the objects produced in that period, but I never stopped collecting. So I didn't stop collecting objects. So I did rather collect objects from the 1970s, the 1980s, the 1990s, the 2000s. But when I called it Jim Crow, it immediately puts in people's minds that not only is racism a thing of the past, but the stuff in the museum only deals with things from the past. So that was a mistake. And I'm getting ready to make that same mistake again. And I'll tell you that in a minute. So the question reporters always ask is, because they're looking for controversy, and they always say, so how much pushback do you get? How many angry people do you get? How many people upset you get? And I was like, not that many. The most common response we get is a kind of reflective sadness. And again, it's from there that we cannot stop. From there we continue the discussions like, why is it that this thing occurred in our culture? Are there examples in our culture now? And we continue that kind of questioning. So I'm not an anthropologist because I can do statistics. Oh, wow. Boy, I'm sorry. It's a tough crowd to joke with. And from now, when I joke, I'll do this thing with my hand. That way you know that I'm joking. All right. That's an old line that anthropologists or sociologists who can't do statistics. Okay. All right, tough crowd. All right, so anyhow, I'm not an anthropologist, but because most of the sociologists go the other way. They focus on non-material culture, attitudes, taste, values, things you can't touch. I focus on material culture, things you can touch, because I believe you can get to the other place from there. I just wrote something. I wrote a little prose. And, you know, I was doing some thinking. I'm going to be flipping here in a minute. Please bear with me. And I'm getting near the end, so just hold on. I was thinking, well, President Obama was born in like 61 or something. Anybody know the year? 61. The Virginia Loving's case, which outlawed anti-miscegenation laws, was in 66, 67, okay? So, but it wasn't illegal in every state for blacks and whites to marry or have sex for that matter. But just go back during the period. I'm just trying to give you a feel for the period. Blacks could not work in many jobs. There's, you know, by any measure, racism was acceptable in our culture in 61. It made some improvements, certainly from the 30s and the like, but still America was faced with some serious race challenges. You could have, I remember Newsweek referring to Hank Aaron when he had hit a home run as a sullen darky. You know, I mean, you could do that kind of stuff in those days. Anyway, imagine if you're a white woman. And now, the Obamas were married, right? Is that right? Okay, they were married. So you've married this black African. And I say black African because not all Africans are what? Black, okay? They were white Africans. So you've married this black African. And you decide to yourself, I'm going to rig this damn thing up so that 40 years from now, this man can be president, or whatever it is. So I'm going to play games with, you see how ridiculous that is? I'm gonna do screwy stuff with his birth certificate. I'm gonna pay off people. I'm gonna do all of this so that 4 or 5 decades later, he can be president of the United States of America. That is ridiculous. Hawaii is a state. He was born in Hawaii, and he's president of the United States. And it just dumbfounds me that we have a sitting president of the United States where citizens ask to see his papers. That is amazing to me. Amazing. And where there's this idea that he's not a real American. It's almost like the rebirth of the 100% Americans or the know-nothing party or something. There's the real us, the real Americans, and the not real Americans idea. So on T-shirts, postcards, again, everyday objects, these images. Again, please come to the museum. Don't take my word for it. At least visit our website. One of the things I hear people saying is that, isn't it the case that people used to say that President Bush the younger was a simian in some way? It's like, yeah, but it was a difference. It was an insult of his what? Intelligence. In the case of the President Obama, it is insulting or questioning his actual humanness. That's different. So, I'm rereading Martin Luther King's letter from Birmingham jail, and I think to myself, I am now going to collect stuff in a meaningful way about other groups. And this quote just stuck with me. So I started collecting. Bought this costume. Where's the costume purchased from? Hello? Walmart. All right? That's not some right-wing fascist. Well, my point is you get my point. And it's cheap. So what is it, $16.82? That means it's economically accessible to most Americans. And I ask you this, and Penn State just had a sorority get in trouble for dressing up in brownface. Anybody kept up with this? And they did a south of the border party, and they had signs that said, "We don't mow weed, we smoke it." And I thought about the Chicago Cubs. They saw a sign there, and it said, what's Albert Pujols mows my lawn. In other words, the richest, most successful, iconic Latin American, Hispanic player is still not one of us. That kind of idea. So when someone asked me about that, one newspaper asked me about that, I said, then well, simply just answer. It's not inherently wrong to dress in a costume here or there, but ask the people a couple questions. For example, when you wear that costume, or you go to a pimp and whore party, or you go to a south of the border party, or a Eskimo party. I mean, just look at the internet. They're just full of them. When you dress like that, how do you act when you're dressed? You understand where I'm going? Your gait, G-A-I-T. How do you walk when you have the costume on? Do you slur? Do you speak any Ebonics when you have the costume on? I know the answers to the questions. We have not as many pieces about Jewish Americans, but we have some, and they almost all emphasize love of money. And I live in an area of Michigan that has a heavy concentration of Dutch Americans. And so one of the things we talk about is the difference between being stingy and greedy. Does everybody understand the difference between? If I want to keep my own money, go Dutch, then I'm what? Stingy. If I want my money and yours, I'm what? Greedy. And so we look at stereotypes about money. And I have traveled this country, and I have asked simple questions. How many of you like money? Matter of fact, how many of you like money? Raise your hands. I'm the only person who likes money, right? Okay. You're like that little girl in the commercial. She don't want more money. You know, the little baby. She throws the thing back at. We love money in this culture. Halloween becomes a time of the year when racially explicit imagery and sexist becomes acceptable. Go to Partyland USA. This is a game called Border Patrol. I first became aware of this game when I walked into a classroom early and saw students playing it. And I've noticed something about racist games. After a while, the person stops thinking about it being racist and just starts trying to win the game. Oh, do you understand the significance of that? See, first the person is using Ebonics or they're doing whatever else. And then after a while, they're just killing Mexicans in a matter-of-fact way. This is that sorority I was talking about. There's hardly a campus in this country where you don't have some examples of this. And the only thing, again, I just ask people, what does that mean? That space is safe to do that. It's safe space. It's less safe if I'm there, not because I'm going to start throwing something, but because I want to talk to people. I want to challenge people. I was in Detroit at DTE giving a presentation, and I got so upset with this whole "we real Americans" and "you're not real Americans," and I said something that didn't come quite right, and I'll say it again. I said, wow, you keep saying you're the real American, so you should get to do this. You should get to do this. You should, and they, because they're not real Americans, they shouldn't get to use public transportation. They shouldn't get subsidized by the federal government. They shouldn't get to vote. Okay, fine. I'll give you something. If you don't know the name of the mayor in the city where you went to sleep last night, you shouldn't get to vote. And the next day, I was accused of supporting literacy tests. And I was like, but that's not what I meant. I was just making a point. In the case of gay Americans, one thing I've noticed is not as many three-dimensional objects, but a lot more flat pieces, you know, signage and the like, but not as many three-dimensional pieces. This is the only thing I'm going to say about the whole gay, straight piece, and that's this. I have talked to more psychologists than I ever cared to, more sociologists, more geneticists, more theologians. I mean, in a whole lifetime of talking to them and asking them, why are some people gay and some people straight? I've read books about stems and brains. I've read soft determinism, hard determinism. I've spent a lifetime of doing this, and I'm not young anymore, and this is what I've concluded. There's not a single American who knows why some people are gay and some people are straight. Not one. Not one. There are people who have theories. Some theories have more evidence than others, but nobody knows. And even if you had a theory in a general way, it wouldn't apply to the person sitting right there. One of the things I'm doing now is I'm building a second museum. It's called the Jane Crow. See, I'm making the same mistake again, Brad. The Jane Crow collection of sexist memorabilia. I've already started moving the stuff into the old room we used to be in, and I've already gone public now in front of the people that I answer to and said, this room's too small. This room is too small. When I first told one of my friends I was going to build a museum about sexism, he said to me, where would you start? And then he asked the more pertinent question, where would you end? Has anybody been in a Spencer's store in the malls? That's a freaking museum. That's a sexism museum. These postcards right here send one message, and the message is what? Shut up. You have no voice. The vote is a voice. You have no voice. Did some work out in Hollywood. One of the first things you notice is there's a line, and the people above the line get to talk. The people below the line don't get to talk. Every room I'm in, I'm talking. And I remember coming back from California, and this is my epiphany. Any situation, this is the activist now. Any situation where it requires courage to speak, there is something wrong with the situation, not the speaker. Let me say it again. I mean that as an absolute. Any situation where it requires courage to speak, there is something wrong with the situation, not the speaker. Now, does that mean that there are not situations that require courage to speak? Of course not. There are way too many situations where it requires courage to speak. And what do we do with women when they don't fulfill the script? We question their sexual orientation, and in some cases, we actually question their sex. Now, no disrespect to President Bush the Elder and his the First Lady Barbara Bush, No disrespect to her, but that's not the persona that First Lady Clinton had. And so, remember when I told you that I used to travel and I would see stuff and I didn't buy it? That image I saw in the 90s, where she would be portrayed as having male genitalia. And now I'll make a parallel. Ambitious African Americans were often accused during the period of Jim Crow of trying to be what? Say it. Here's a case where an ambitious, strong woman is accused of not actually trying to be, but being a what? A man. And that's an everyday object. That's an apron. That's a magazine, which also became a poster, which is also on a t-shirt. They are objects, not just images. There's nothing wrong with cleaning. Although you think so if you came to my house. There's nothing wrong with cleaning. But when we tell little girls in an anticipatory, you know what anticipatory socialization is? That's when the person starts performing the roles that lay in their future, practicing the roles. That's what that looks like to me, doesn't it? I think there's like 2 slides left. Give me a minute. This right here, this one, I don't know how many of you have anything to do with decisions. But I think this is how my mind works, okay? Burger King, again, is not a small company. This is not Big Bob's Burgers, okay? This is Burger King. So 6 people, 8 people, 11 people, some number of people with college degrees, presumably some experience making decisions like this, got together, sat around a table, not for one day, for weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks, and came up with a campaign to sell this hamburger. And this is what they came up with. Take a doll, a sex doll, and have a human, what do you call it when a human, what is it, when you give human characteristics to a, okay, they went the other way. You follow what I'm saying? They went the other way. They took the inanimate object, the sex doll, and gave it humans. Do you follow me? You understand what I'm saying? We're all adults in here. And I'm like, wow, how could that get out of that room? That's why I challenge people. I mean, it's great to make money and it's great to be successful and all, but every now and again, and too often, you have to like say, I'm sorry, this one ain't working for me. This one sends the wrong messages. So when I'm at Ohio State, the Ohio State University, my professors used to look at me and they go, wow, see, David, here's the deal. There are sociologists, and by sociologists they meant pure sociologists. They meant sociologists who, in an objective way, go out and basically treat human behavior as if it was sodium and chloride. Don't let your values get involved. This fixing the world stuff, that's for social workers. Let the social workers fix stuff, because if you become an advocate, you lose your objectivity. And they would say you have got to practice the acquisition of knowledge for knowledge's sake. And this is my response to that. Knowledge for knowledge's sake is a waste of knowledge, is what it is. So I'm saying to you a couple things. I'm going to challenge you. Some of you have objects that would fit in a museum that dealt with sexism. We have lots of women's museums in this country, but we don't have a sexism museum. Just like we have lots of African American museums, but we didn't have a museum of racist memorabilia. Every African American museum I've ever been in, every large public museum I've been in, has stuff in their basement that would be in my museum, and they're afraid to show it for fear that some patron won't give them money. But they accepted it from people, but they'll never show it. And in every women's museum, there are objects in the basement that defame women, that could be used to teach not just lessons of tolerance, but the lessons of social justice. And so I've started. That's my friend Franklin that I was telling you about. And I am probably one of the happiest middle-aged men in this country to have just gotten a whole collection of Susie Homemaker ovens. I'm talking the real ones, the old ones. I wouldn't eat nothing come out of one of them, but I'm just saying that they're old, you know, with the little bitty things. So if you have stuff about the abolitionist movement, because I see a link in my mind. I'll get you in my head for a minute. I'm almost done. I see a link in where our space is, where the Jim Crow Museum is going this way, and the Jane Crow Museum cuts across here, because I'm thinking about the role women played in the abolitionist movement. Okay? And I see this link. When I say link, I don't mean just a conceptual link. I mean an actual physical space cutting across each other the way I want this other place built. And some of those, unfortunately, some of those women, when they became suffragettes, I can never say the words, suffragists, when they became, they also started displaying some anti-black sentiments. We've discussed that. And then you had these various incarnations of women's rights movements. Proud to hear the president recognize that in his address, and not just that. But then you also have caricatures, just like with African Americans. So you have the hag, the nag, the gold digger, you shrew, all these harsh caricatures. And then you have, just like with African Americans, women who attack those caricatures. Women of distinction in this culture. And you have, that's going around, and then in the middle, toys and games and ashtrays and postcards and the like, which taught a society to be sexist. By that I mean, the same as with the black pieces. They shaped ideas about women and they reflected them. So I wanted to leave you with that, and then one last piece. I've been trying to write a short story. I used to write a lot of short stories. And once I became an administrator, being an administrator sucks the creative life out of you. No, I'm serious. You can't do a damn thing worth anything when you're an administrator. I'm sorry, you're an administrator in here? Other than me? Don't cut that part out of the tape when you do the tape. No, I'm serious. Cut that part out of the tape. It sucks the creative juices out of you. But I used to write a lot of short stories. I wrote a short story about the day everybody woke up black in America, and they tried to put this racial identification program in place. I had a lot of worlds I created. But anyhow, I tried to write a short story, and it just hasn't worked yet. And it's a short story about a river. And it's basically from H. Ross Perot's quote, and this is the only thing I quote from H. Ross Perot, that the activist is not the one who says the river is dirty, the activist is the one who cleans the river, although he said man. And so I think about this town that has a river going through it, and it's dirty and it's stinky and it's got a bunch of nasty stuff. And some people come down to the river and they look at it and they recognize that it's dirty and stinky and just got pollution. And other people look at it and they say, well, you know, it's bad, but it used to be worse. And then there's other people who look at it and they go, well, it's bad, but it's not as bad as some other rivers I've known. And then other people think, well, you know what, it's bad, but one day we'll clean the river. And then the people get frustrated because they can't figure out what to do with the river or if they should do anything at all with the river, and they decide to pay someone $1,000 a minute, Rush Limbaugh or Cornel West, to fly all the way into the city and look at the river and tell them what? That it's dirty. And then get back and fly away. And then there are people who stand on the banks, and what they do is they look at the people who clean in the river and they say, we don't like the way you clean in the river. We'd like for you to do it in a less direct way. But as they say that, they're dry. And what I challenge each of you to do is to get in the river and get wet. Get knee deep, chest deep in slime, because it ain't going to clean itself. Thank you for inviting me here, Brad. If some of you stick around, others, I understand you have to go, but if someone wants to stay around and ask a couple questions, that'll be good.
Thank you very much. I haven't been to your museum, either the older version or the new one, and I look forward to it. But I was told by someone here in Museum Studies that there was in the old incarnation that visitors had a kind of a mediated experience before they saw the objects. And I wondered if that was still the case, and if so, what form that takes.
The groups are still mediated, but hopefully we did our job well, so now a person, like a couple, could just come through by themselves, or an individual could come through. But we spent a lot of time with didactic panels, with research and the like, and we're open, I think we're open every day from 12 to 5, and groups have to be mediated just because we have to accommodate the size, but also when you get to the last room, that's a place where we could have discussions. But there is always someone there.
I'm wondering, is there a space where people can have the opportunity to handle some of these very tactile objects or facsimiles of them to get the real full experience of some of these kitchen objects and so on? Yeah,
I wish I'd show. No, there is not. We used to have an alligator that when you open it up, it said, them surely some tasty cookies. And that was an alligator. And then the elephant just made the elephant sound, the dog just made the dog sound, and they're all part of the same set. And we wanted people to see how that was different. But other than that, we haven't had, and you're not the first person to ask that, by the way. I think we can satisfy some of that by, we have the space for 2 kiosks in there, but we were waiting to get our cataloging in some kind of order, and that was to be the data on the kiosk, and that was going to be the thing that they could touch to kind of satisfy that. But that's a great question, and at this point, no. You know, it's weird. I was just telling someone the other day, someone has an object, they beat it up, they stomp on it, they do terrible things to it, and then they give it to us and we won't let people touch it. I mean, we treat it as if it was, you know, gold or something. So, but that's going to be the way we probably handle that. You know, we probably could do some other things because so many of the pieces in our collection are doubles or triples or what I call clones of other pieces. So it's not like we you know, and it's also the case, and I've struggled with this personally, we have the capacity to create racist pieces. By that I mean, there's all kind of papers that we can reproduce, and we could certainly let people handle those. And now we will do that with the postcards and stuff, but they're not really handling, they just pull the drawer out and like that. But we could create other stuff. It's just I've warred with that, and I think a lot of changes is going to happen with the museum once I stop being involved and let the people over there just run it.
I've noticed that in a number of museums now there's kind of opportunities for visitors to give feedback, to give expressions. Do you do anything like that? Because I would think that it would be a basis for getting a lot of kind of dialogue started. And
well, the thing, we've only have like the written part so far. But one thing we have now is a space. We just got to figure out how to populate it. We have a space where we're going to start doing is shooting videos of people's experiences. And we have got to do that because blacks, whites, reds, browns, yellows, and all who lived during the period of Jim Crow are dying. And because if you figure, if Jim Crow in a real way ended in late 60s, 67 or so, if you look at, depending on what law you say ended it, you know, what is that, 77, 87, 97, 100? I mean, so now, you know, the people are getting older. And we just had a man come in the other day who was a walking encyclopedia. A little bit opinionated, and for me to say that, that's something. But what a wonderful testimony that would have been to just capture that. So we have a station now. We have the cameras and stuff. We just have to figure out how to populate it. And by that, I mean staff it, you know. That's an area we need to do better in. Yes? Not very many. We have a museum assistant who you know, works 40 plus hours a week. We have a docent, a museum docent person who's like that, who handles all the tours. We have a director, but who is at this point still a part-time director. And then we have volunteer docents who just are used as needed. I've just applied for an IMLS grant to hire an education coordinator. And the university is looking at hiring at least the College of Arts and Sciences, because our museum is located in the College of Arts and Sciences, not in my office. And they're looking at hiring a full-time faculty member to be the director of the museum. And so if we got that plus, say, 2 or 3 interns from the University of Michigan, from Smith College, from Colby College, from some other places, that, you know, we'd be in great shape. I think you could actually run our facility with 3 or 4 full-time people. I really do, just because of the number of volunteer people. And we're also now exploring having a museum studies minor, which would give us, you would think, some interns or the like. When we do put out an ad, you know, asking for a director, I mean, I'm hoping that this is one of the programs where you would encourage your graduates to, I mean, I want the good ones, but I mean, encourage the graduates to, they're all good, they're all good. Don't you think that would be a cool job? Anybody think that would be a cool job? Yeah. If you could work with me, yeah, go ahead.
People should be encouraged to say Black African. Then shouldn't they also be encouraged to say White European?
Yeah, probably, yeah.
But you don't see that.
That is true. That is true. And I tell you, words. The whole dealing with words is such a shape. It's like wrestling with a shapeshifter. You know. And I'm learning so much now about the whole, the collecting the women's stuff. I can't be unsympathetic to white Americans or other groups for not knowing the stuff, because I am learning so much that I did not know about the experiences of women in our culture. You know, and so I'm learning. And I'll give you an example that feeds off of your point. I used to always tell a story about this male nurse. And one of my students, you know, she said, "What the hell is a male nurse?" I was like, you know, it's a nurse who's a guy. She's like, yeah, but it's not an occupation. You know, I was like, oh my goodness, I've been saying that over and over again. You know, but again, that's it, higher ed. We should be talking about what words. I'm not meaning what's politically correct or not correct or whatever. I'm just saying it ought to be a place where we talk, well, like what you said. I'll give you another example. I had a guy who, and I shouldn't mention that he's a black nationalist, because that looks like I'm trying to shape his opinion, but he's a black nationalist, and it came out of that he said this to me. He didn't like in my writings when I referred to people that were enslaved as slaves. And I was like, well, but they were slaves. And he was like, no, they were not slaves. They were enslaved. And I was like, okay, and I've been, you know, thinking about that, and I don't get defensive at this point in my life. I want to learn. You know, I don't expect to please everybody, but I want to learn. And I started thinking about what the difference between saying slave, a slave, or an enslaved person. And there was a difference. I don't think it's as great in a functional, practical way as he believes, but there is a difference. You know, I had a gay colleague who said to me that she has a problem when people say gays. And I was like, well, why? She was like, well, they should say gay people. And I was like, well, should I say black people or whatever? She said, well, say whatever you want to about them, but I'm gay, so when it comes to gay, I want you saying gay people. I was like, what do you mean? She said, because oftentimes it's not implicit in the word. Now, I'm a sociologist, so that means 2 things. One, I don't believe words have an inherent meaning, but I understand that we give them meanings, including subtle meanings. So I was like, wow, okay, I kind of get that. So yeah, to that point, you know, talking about what words mean, what they don't mean, and getting people to listen. You know, getting them to listen. Yes?
I can't wait to go back to the new museum with my mom. It's kind of a weird mother-daughter tradition now to take a field trip like that. But just not to put too fine a point on it, but with the Burger King ad, to compound it, it's not only that some executives at Burger King made the decision to approve that ad, but that there's an ad agency
that's true.
where there are levels and levels of people who actually sat around and decided to do that.
Well, and I'll take your point further. And people that bought the hamburger, you know what I'm saying? Because the ad in some way drew them in or whatever. And Burger King is probably not, well, I'll stop. I was going to say something about the quality of the food, but I eat anything, so they don't need me being a hypocrite.
So are you building any kind of documentary collections around what you are producing at the museum? And or how are you doing with your own institutional archive? And then the second piece is like, do you have any thoughts on the internet effect of what you're kind of documenting in this issue of the contemporary society?
All right, two hard questions. The first one is, remember I started out by saying one of my big mistakes in life was not being a good enough record keeper in the start. So I didn't lay a good foundation. Having said that, over the years we have, obviously we have records of the stuff that we own. The question has always been, should you have access to our collection from, say, here versus just an intranet access? We've put a committee together. We now have a task force. It took us forever to get one. But we now have a task force, and that's a big question that we're answering. We just brought in a group of friends and colleagues from Central. We were just, I think well, I wasn't at it, but there was just a conference call with that Arab American Museum, the one that, where's that? Dearborn, and with Grand Valley's Museum and Art Group to talk about what kind of access do they give people and how do they give it in terms of protected passwords, in terms of whatever. So I'm telling you, I'm part of the problem. And by that I mean this. I think it was my fears that kind of held us back for a while. Now, there was a period of about 4 or 5 years where I wasn't involved in the museum, and I only came back like 2 or 3 years ago because I thought that was necessary to get it built. But early on, I worried about things like someone seeing an image on our website and then recreating a T-shirt or a pin back, that pins you pin on you or something. And I think it was my fear that sort of held us back from making some of those decisions, because the idea then was, well, David Pilgrim, he's the founder, and he doesn't want this stuff out there. He just wants enough of it so people can see it, so that we can tell the lessons that we need to tell. And it's been since, like I said, since we got a new dean of the library, which probably is where the archive's going to be on their system, who's sort of taken the lead on this and has opened up my mind and sort of forced me to grow. And realize that there's a way we can make some of the actual imagery accessible to the world without perpetuating racism. So I'm accepting responsibility for us not being farther along with that. I will say this now, I'm probably wrong. I only know one person who took some of what we did and used it to make money, and that was an eBay purchaser. And I know it was from us because they took a big Mammy banner we had that when it was in the museum, it had a laundry bag next to it that also had an image on it. And they didn't even clip that out of it. There was a picture on our website that I put that on there deliberately so it would not be an enticing picture to use, and they took that, and they still put it on calendars and pin backs and stuff. So that's been a struggle for me, and I'm now willing to accept that there are password codes, and with the new technology where we can make stuff available. Having said that, I pushed us back 3 or 4 years from doing the work that would be necessary to make it available. So that's all on me. Yeah.
Thanks so much for your presentation. That was amazing.
Thank you.
I just wanted to, as a side note, I first came across your museum when I was a sophomore in high school, just having read the autobiography of Malcolm X and wanting to understand why white men were raping black women, and it's just like, if they're racist, why would they rape them? And you know, being
that is why you do it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
At 15, I didn't get that.
Yeah.
I went to your museum and read about the Jezebel, images of the Jezebel. But no, I had a question about the Jane Crow Museum and what you're going to do with representations of women of color. And how you're thinking about what space you think would be, you know, most appropriate to exhibit those objects. Because I know you mentioned you're not thinking of expanding the collection for the Jim Crow, so dealing with representations of women of color within the Jane Crow Museum.
Okay, let me try to figure it out. Okay, and let me start by saying, years ago, before I was an administrator and I was a faculty member, I went to an administrator and I said, I would like to start collecting stuff about women. And it was a female administrator, and she said no. And I said, well, I'm not actually asking your permission. And I just want you aware that I'm doing it. Well, the university's never going to give you any money for this. I was like, well, that's fine, but I just want you to know I'm doing this. And I said, oh, man, I never say this to people, but I want you to understand that there's a race, you know, your argument is racially tinged in probably a way you don't understand. And she's like, well, what are you talking about? Well, you're trying to, and then people get offensive when you say, you know, higher ed, everybody's liberal. And so I said, well, okay, I don't want to offend you or anything, but I've always collected stuff about women, but they were black women. But when I talk about the mammy and what, you know, even when I talk about pickaninnies, some of those are girls, when I talk about, I've always collected stuff about women. You seem now to be concerned because I'd be adding white women to it. Do you realize what you're saying? So I said that because a lot of what we have in the Jim Crow Museum is, you know, is about women already. Now, in terms of the Women's Museum, your question is especially poignant, because one of the debates I've been having with this team of people that kind of organized me, we were at one point, like I wrote an article one time called The Garbage Man, Why I Collect Racist Memorabilia, or Racist Objects. And at the conclusion of that, I said that we would name, that now I'm going to start working on this women's thing, and that we will name it the Sarah Bartman Room. And so everybody got excited because that allows you to show the intersection between imperialism and colonialism and sexism and racism, all that. This is a perfect thing, right? And then I kind of got to a different part where I just felt like I couldn't do her service in that facility. She needs her own, she needs a section in a bigger thing, if that makes sense. And I started going back and forth, and I was like, well, is this going to be a museum about American women? Is it going to be a museum? Because when you, like, if I say to you, create a museum about sexism, again, where would you start? And what would be, with Jim Crow, I had a nice umbrella, you know, but I don't have that with the women. So I thought, okay, it'll be a museum that focuses on the way women are being mistreated. So instead of just singling out an individual woman, use that Jane Crow as a way of, you know, of talking about discrimination against women generally. And we're still debating that. I mean, it's still got people there like, no, you should putting a woman of color's name there. And I was like, yeah, but I don't know. So it hasn't been totally resolved. Now, with what I'd like to do though is within this museum, incorporate women of color in a lot of the areas and also have distinct sections. So that's the way, I mean, now what I've done is I have probably 7 women's studies professors and me, and that's what it is. So we haven't worked it all out yet. You know, I tried to get there. I don't know, did I get even close to answering your question?
Yeah, I was just curious about how you were thinking about these things, and then it makes me also think about, to add to the mix, you know, transgender women of color and.
Yeah. Well, now, see, we actually the little room doesn't have a lot of room for stuff, so it'll be samples of everything. And we just had this, I'm probably giving you way too much information here, but I had gone around the room and got to the other side, and when the Jim Crow stuff was in there, the caricatures were on one side, and the other side was like violence, because the idea was that the caricatures are like the fertile ground that produces that kind of stuff. So I was going to do the same thing with the women's pieces, and I got all the way over there, And then we had one empty showcase left. And it's like, okay, well, someone says, right, well, then we'll put the transgender, the gay, transgender, whatever in there. I was like, well, wait a second. What message does that send when you have all the caricatures, then you have all the violence, and then you add the transgender? That's kind of weird. So the question then becomes almost like in the classroom, do you incorporate those lessons within bigger things, or do you single them out in some way? And my answer to that as a teacher was both. So when I talked about it, when I taught sociology and I talked about the American family, African Americans were in every chapter, Latino Americans were in every chapter, gays were in every chapter, but I also made sure that we paused at some point and talked about them distinctly. So it's a challenge to figure out how to do that, yeah. Well, in the case of, if you Google, or Dogpile, or whatever one you use, sexism museum, what you'll find is there is a person who has an internet site. So it's kind of like a virtual museum. But I can't find an actual sexism museum. There are social justice exhibitions, and there are sexist exhibitions, and there are some collections, but not in the way I would do it. The same is the case with African Americans. There are many, many African American, well, relatively speaking, many African American museums in the country. The Wright Museum, the Sabo, different, but not one whose focus was to point you toward the racism. So that's what I'd be doing with the sexism piece. I will tell you this, though. When I get in people's homes, there are Americans with collections of anything you can think of. So, for example, with my Jim Crow collection, as outstanding as that is, they don't have as many, but I could tell you there are 2 or 3 people's homes that are just, it's like that, but it's not publicly accessible. And the same thing with some sexism material. Although people did not collect, what happened with black material and with so-called black memorabilia and with, say, Native American memorabilia and Jewish memorabilia, price guides came out. In the 1980s, price guides came out. I'm not meaning 2, I'm not meaning 3, I'm talking dozens of price guides. And whenever price guides come out, that's what antique dealers think they're supposed to charge you, so it kind of sets a market. Now, eBay and the internet gave you a more realistic market and contradicted those price guides, but there weren't really price guides for sexist material is what I'm saying. So, I mean, you could look at some antique books and every now and again you'll see a suffrage postcard and it'll have a price on it, but there's no whole section. But if you go to eBay and you type in suffrage, then you'll pull up some, some few pieces. But it's not like with black memorabilia where there's a name for like the whole collection, you see what I mean? So so because there's not that, I don't know for sure. But my suspicion would be that there are some great collections out there. And one of the things I'm doing now, this is a mistake I'm not making. This time around, every time I give a speech, I'm telling people about this new museum and I'm begging for objects. So in case someone has dolls and has other objects or whatever, and they want to donate them, you would know that they would be used in this way. I'm so proud of those students. They're hanging in there. They're thinking he might actually say something interesting here and I don't want to miss it. That is so awesome.
Thank you for coming this evening, and thank you once again to David Pilgrim.
Thank you.